We are live. Good evening, everybody. How are we doing? How you
I'm,
doing, Lee?
I'm doing great, Yogi. I'm glad
Good.
everybody's here. I hope you guys are ready to ask lots of questions because that's what truly makes this fun. And don't forget to add on that what you might want us to do next time, don't be afraid to fire that off too, right, Yogi?
That's right. We want as many questions as we can possibly get from you guys. So, at the end of last week, I was asked about this bone angle thing, right? Wasn't I? So, um, I thought that it wouldn't take long to talk about that. So I thought what I'd talk about, or what we talk about, is generally what we can understand about the inside of the foot from the outside of the foot, and what we can measure, and those kind of things, and the importance of hoof balance, of measuring hoof balance. So I know you document your hoof balance, don't you, Lee?
Yes.
And how much difference have you felt that's made to your practice?
I think it's life changing, really. And I mean, anytime you're keeping track, it's so nice. I mean, that's when you truly helping horses. I think when you start helping horses, and
Yeah, definitely. I
you get
found for me that when I started taking proper, accurate photos of my feet, it completely changed the way that I thought about shoeing it completely. It made me start to think about, rather than, you see these photos on Facebook of people taking beautiful photos of their shiny shoes and their beautiful nail lines, this, that, and the other. But when I started actually taking photos of feet as if it was an X-ray, to look at the same kind of things as an X-ray, all of a sudden it kind of highlighted all of the things I wasn't getting right with the shoeing, right? Whereas you like to take photos of all the nice, pretty stuff,
the
but it's the
best angle.
it's the numbers and the proportions that matter the most. So I thought we'd talk about that today, just in general, about measuring hoof balance and what we can tell about the inside from the outside. How does that sound?
Yeah, I think the take home message to a lot of people today is that we want to talk about ways to make a difference in your own horses, whether you're a horse owner or a farrier, and judging that by the outside and knowing or have a good estimation of what's going on the inside. And the take home message to me, I don't know about you, Yogi, but is proactive in catching problems before there's actually damage or issues, right?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think we can start. We can start with some of these slides. So we're talking about measuring hoof balance, and we talked a little bit about taking photos and stuff like that. And the reality is that if we want to make any kind of assessment about the hoof, then we have to take a photo that actually tells us something about the hoof. And that starts with taking accurate photos, like this, with me down on the floor like that. You have got to get a bit uncomfortable to actually get some important information, get some decent data. So that's the first thing, I think, is talking about actually how you take your photographs. Have you got any hints on that?
Yeah, for sure. I think when everybody knows what an X-ray looks like, or has probably seen one done. So what the take-home message is if you do that same exact shot, then now you have something to compare it to. And taking good photos is number one to me. Number two is taking photos that you can compare. And then three is backing up and a whole horse approach, because a lot of times posture changes and not getting so focused on just the hoof capsule itself. So good pictures, consistent pictures, whole horse approach.
Exactly. And we know from studies, so if we look at this White et al. 2008 study, it showed that if you take a digital photograph with the lens focused on the bottom edge of the foot at 90 degrees to the foot, as your same protocol as you would for a radiograph, then the hoof balance assessment that you can get from there is comparable to a radiograph. And so that's important. So because the question originally asked was about this bone angle palmar angle relationship, right? Well, the reason we started here is because you can't tell anything about that relationship unless you get an actual accurate reading, an actual accurate hoof angle measurement. And that has to start with a decent photo. So that's kind of why we're starting here. So, and this is what I was talking about. So this is a shoeing job of mine on the top left, on the left. And I was taking a photo of my fit. I was taking a photo of my nail line. But in reality, it means absolutely nothing in terms of biomechanics. It's not repeatable. And it's certainly not any use for comparing with radiographs. So as you were saying, Lee, this is what the difference is between a photograph that actually means something and that can actually tell us something.
Right. And that is another thing too. If you don't know what the green lines are and the red lines are, that's Yogi's app. It's pretty cool. So it's the Hoof M app, right?
Yeah, that's right. Hoof M with a big A app. And we're going to talk about that as we go through as well, so people can get a bit more understanding of what it tells us. So, because the question about palmar angle and how to recognize it, and about how to recognize internal anatomy from external reference points, was the whole reason I created the app, was to give the general population and the farriers and the owners and everyone a way to talk to each other about hoof balance with something that's objective rather than subjective. So we're going to go on to that. So let me ask a question. Can you tell the difference between these 2 feet?
No.
No. And if you was to see the foot on the left today, and then you were to see the foot on the right in 6 weeks' time, would you know what the difference was then? That'd be even worse. That's right. And what about these 2 feet? Can you tell the difference?
No.
Okay. So this is the problem, and this is what you pointed out earlier, Lee. You said straight away off the bat, you said catching things earlier, how important that is. So here, the changes that happen to hoof balance happen slowly, don't they? They happen slowly over time. And as you rightly said, we want to catch these things as early as possible, because by the time we've noticed it with our eyes, it's already gone through some big changes. I'm sure you've experienced the same thing, Lee.
Yeah, and I think that's why the number 2 point was so important to me, is being able to compare. Like, nobody wants more work to do. I get it. But the thing is, though, it doesn't take that long. And if you have the system and you just take a picture and you can track the progress, because it's just like nobody realizes how fast their kids are growing up, right? Or whatever, how old your dad got or whatever, right? When you're around them, but you get away from them for a little bit, and then you're like, whoa. Well, when you spend every day with your horse, or you see them all the time, it's kind of hard. Like, you see them every 5 weeks, it's kind of hard to, I don't know. You can catch problems, but I'm just saying it's easier to keep track of when you have the same exact picture, this day, before, after.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's look at this. Look, these are the 2 feet from earlier. Can you tell the difference now?
Yeah, because there's
Of course you can, because the numbers tell you, right? So this is the point, is and we're talking about a 4-degree difference in the heel angle. Now that matters, and you can see the difference in the base proportions is also changing. So, and if you caught this now, then you could start doing something about it now, rather than waiting until you actually notice it. So that was the whole reason that I created Hoof Map, was because I'm very passionate about keeping feet where they need to be optimally, and keeping track of the changes. Because in any other profession, the vets, the physios, they keep clear clinical records of what they do with the horses, the outcomes and stuff like that. But as farriers, we tend to say, oh yeah, that looks great, but we don't put any numbers to anything. And so we can think
you could even prove your case better. And just
Yeah.
like everybody understands, cover your butt. Well, you got to also not cover your butt, but you got to prove your worth too. You know, like you want to charge more, you believe you do a good job, then prove it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if people remember back to the case that we talked about on our first chat, you know, the subjectively, somebody could have come along and said, okay, Lee, the angles look worse, the proportions look worse. But actually, when you measured it, we showed that we were spot on 50-50 around point of balance. So actually, you know, that's the danger with being subjective. And like you said, if you objectively got the measurements there, you can cover your own ass. But also, you know, you can take proactive approach to care. So
Absolutely. And one more thing that I want to say too is that when Yogi's talking about this stuff, like I feel like we had a great live call the first time when we were talking about the differences in measurements and what guidelines that you're going for. You can use whatever measurement that you want. If you like the point of balance, or if you like the center of rotation, center of articulation, you can do anything you want to. And you can perimeter fit, you can fit them however you want to. But this is just, he's just saying that this is a great way to track your progress or lack of.
yeah, absolutely. So let's start looking at this is we're going to go into looking at external measurements for internal anatomy, because that was the question, wasn't it? The question was about bone angle, palmar angle, and hoof angle, and how those relationships work, how we can understand our palmar angle. But it's a bigger story than that, because the danger with just purely talking about that is that people forget that there's a whole balance paradigm around palmar angle, around bone angle, around all these kind of things. So to start with, I suppose I should go back to here and explain that there is no such thing as an ideal palmar angle. So I'm sure you agree. I know you agree with that, Lee. How often are you told? This is something that I've experienced. How often are you told by, let's not pick on the vets, but we say a vet. How often have you been told by a vet, oh, everything's fine with the hoof balance because it's got a positive PA?
I've heard that. I've heard that a lot from horse owners or for people that shoe with an angle gauge, a lot. And I just feel like that is such a disservice. You know, like the good vets that I work with, they don't talk like that. They know they're individuals. They know they have their own needs. And that's why I think we're talking about creating a history, a track record, and so we can prove how good we're doing or spots that we need to improve, where it's not comparing it to the textbook, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, when it comes to bone angle, palmar angle, and this explains it a little bit here, right? Is we can have two horses. So there's on the left, on the left, we've got two horses that both have a bone angle of 50 degrees. Mm-hmm. One's got a PA of 7 and one's got a PA of 3. Okay, so they both have a straight hoof past an axis. One's got a straight hoof past an axis at 57 degree. The other one's got a straight hoof past an axis at 53 degrees. But they both have very different PAs in order to get that, because they've both got very different bone angles. And this is the point, right? You can't say, oh, every horse should have 50 degree or 55 degree or 53 degree. Every horse should have a PA of 5 degrees. You can have a PA of anything. Like if you look at the third one, this guy's got a PA of 14, but that's because he's got a very, very acute bone angle that might need a larger palmar angle in order to have a straight hoof past an axis. So this is the important thing. So
absolutely,
that's why I wanted to. You have to be careful when you talk about the correct PA, that you're looking at the bigger picture, right?
Well, yeah, and stay on this slide. I feel like that's why people create problems, is trying to make them something that they're not, like the square peg in the round hole, like I talked about. But more specifically, We, in short, we work on a lot of horses that are struggling, that have gone through the ringer, and a lot of them seem to be high-low horses. And that's not all of our horses, but there's a lot of them, more than normal. And my approach is that you shoe the left foot how the left foot needs shod, whether that's the high or the low, and then you shoe the right foot how the right foot needs shod, whether that's high or low, and do not try to match them. And they end up, when you shoe them like that, they end up being close. But I know that if you try to make the low foot look like the high foot or the high foot look like the low foot, you're going to break that horse. And it's the same way with comparing one horse to a different horse.
Yeah, I completely agree. At the end of the day, the best we can do is create as close to the ideal for each individual foot as we can. And if that makes them closer, then great. If it doesn't, then that's your restriction, that's your limitation. So let's get on to recognizing internal anatomy according to external landmarks. So there's lots of ways of doing this. Do you map your feet, Lee?
When I'm in trouble, yeah, I encourage my guys to, or someone that I'm just helping, I encourage them to map them. But I think the important part is those are guidelines. Like you don't live and die by that.
Yeah, definitely. I know certainly for me is that when I got guys who first come and work for me, I get them to map, and I get them to map consistently because it trains your eye to start to be able to do it without mapping. And that's the same thing as the whole of the use of hoof map for the lateral view as well. You train your eye to start seeing, so you use the mapping to get yourself there. So
absolutely. And you can actually do it really fast. I know you've got a great way to do this right here, but my own personal primitive way is I just find the center of rotation in the foot and draw a line with my rasp across it, and then one line behind the rasp, flip the rasp on top of it, one line in front of it. And then if you want to show, feet are not proportional, so don't take me wrong here, but if you flip it vertically like a sagittal plane from heel to toe, put a rasp there in a line, and beside it you get a line. And to me, that is the easiest way to explain to people what hoof balance is and help train young farriers and keep me in check. So yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, great. So obviously, so you mentioned there finding center of rotation. So there's different methods for finding center of rotation. So you got Duckett's bridge, which is the yellow line, and that corresponds with the widest point of the sole, right? So the widest point of the sole should correspond with the internal center of rotation. So if we look on the top right, you can see the radiograph of the foot, right? So you've got the widest point of the sole is the yellow line, that's center of rotation. But there's other ways of finding it, right? So the Mark Caldwell kind of validated this method in his PhD. If you take the very bottom of the buttress of the heel, where it blends in with the frog, and you project a line forward to the inside of the white line. If you do that on both sides and then cross it over, where they cross over, you get this, you can see the little red dot in the middle. So this is the red lines. That's also your center of rotation. So that should correspond with Duckett's bridge. So it's a good way of just double checking, because sometimes, like if you've got a foot that's dead straight, like this, you're like, well, where's the widest point, right? Because all the way up the foot is all the same width. So sometimes the widest point can be a little bit tricky to kind of work out. So then you can use this method to just clarify exactly where that widest point of the sole is, if you get lost with like funny shaped feet that you can't exactly find the widest point of the sole. And there are other mapping systems as well, but we'll leave them for another day. But you can see here on the bottom right, you have Jim Ferry established this back in 2007. That's the earliest I heard it from anyway. If you take a line across the hairline and you split it into thirds, the intersection between the first third and the second third you've got a little red line there you can see on the image. That tells you your center of rotation. So that's the first kind of lateral view image that tells us where the center of rotation is. Because obviously the problem with mapping the foot is great for the farrier, but it's not so great for the owner after it's been shod to work out what the base proportions are around it. So that's why we then move on to lateral photographs. I think you do the same, don't you, Lee? Yeah, I've seen it on your radiographs as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I think it's a good way to just track progress and actually visually see if you can help more or if you can't help more.
Definitely. So this is Jim Ferry. This is his study here. So you can see, you go along the hairline. If you go 1/3 along, that gives you your center of rotation. You've also got this circle, which you'll see on our template as well. The front of the circle tells you where the extensor process is. The back of the circle gives you your estimation of your navicular bone. And then the one that I've added in between the center of rotation and extensor process, that's the point of balance there. So what I did was I wanted to test this theory, because me being me, I wanted to make sure that it actually held up in practice. So what I did was we created this template, which is used in hoof map. So you can see the template across the hairline. You've got the green circle, you've got the point of balance, which is the big red notch. You've got the center of rotation, which is a small red notch. So I got a load of x-rays and I put the template on, and then I calculated the distance from the center of rotation that the template said and the actual center of rotation on the x-ray. And we found that there was absolutely no statistical difference between the two. So it proved to us that the template was indeed showing us the internal anatomy, right? So all of a sudden now we know that if we put that template on the foot externally, we're mapping that internal anatomy. And I also wanted to make sure was, if I use it and you use it, we both get the same answer. So I published a paper on that as well, and we showed that there was, I won't go through all the boring statistics, but it showed that if I use it and you use it, we get the same answer. So hoof map is very good for this. So what we ended up knowing was that, so this is the x-ray of the same foot, right? So this tells us that using our hoof map template, it can tell us where all of our internal anatomy is. Now, how useful is that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's so useful. So we stick this template on, we know where the center of rotation is, we know where the point of balance is, we know where the extensor process is, and we know where the navicular bone is. So then we know when we put the other templates on, we know that we're shooing around internal anatomy. So that was why I created it, because it creates a language for everybody to understand.
Honestly, the majority of the time that I use your app, I was even using it wrong for years until you corrected me, but I was using that, how you have the coronary band marker, whatever you call that line, how it's so cool because it shows you the point of balance, which is more important to me than center of rotation on normal shooting. You can immediately know right where that is. So I think that's cool, but I wasn't using it that way. I was using it vertically, finding center of rotation, and then knowing that I wasn't going to get the numbers just right. So it was helpful, but I wasn't even using it right, and it was still helpful.
Great. So that's the second. Go on, you carry on.
The second thing that I look for is just sole depth. I think that the trim is just one thing that just can't be. You can't know enough about it, So when you start measuring how close you've got your trim on sole depth under the coffin bone, then to me, that is what tells the whole story. And if you're talking about negative plantar or palmar, if you can measure how much depth you have at the palmar aspect of the coffin bone, right at the wings, then I know how much I got to work with. I know immediately, whether I measured it or not, that's where I'm looking. I know immediately if I'm going to be able to help this horse without pads and just a trim, or if it's going to trim out ultimately.
Yeah, and with hoof map we can have if as long as you got something on the radiograph that you know the length of, you can calibrate the templates and it tells you exact measurements in millimeters. So it can actually tell you how much sole depth you've got physically to as a measurement as well. So we can do that with hoof map. But so after we've located all this internal anatomy, then this is where we build on the other templates to work out our base proportions, our toe angle versus our heel angle, our toe height versus our heel height. And then obviously those measurements, so heel angle, toe height, they are what directly affect hoof past and axis. The other thing that is really, really useful about hoof map is, I don't know if it ever happens to you, Lee, but do you ever argue with your clients about shoe length cycle?
Not really. I mean, no, I
Shoe
just
cycle length, I mean, sorry, the length of shoeing.
I kind of have a hard rule of 5 weeks, or might not be your people.
Yeah. Well, see, I'm very much the same. I have a rule. So my polo horses are shod every 4 weeks. No negotiation. But I know a lot of people, a lot of farriers struggle with that conversation about shoeing the horses on time. People want to stretch them out. And what we can actually do with hoof map is, because we've got both of these notches, we've got the point of the center of rotation and the point of balance. It builds a really good method of communication between the farrier and the owner, because you want to keep your 50-50 balance in between that green zone, right? So that tells you your maximum length of your shoeing cycle, because as soon as 50-50 moves outside of that green zone, then it's time to shoot a horse. So that's another really useful thing. I can explain that more another time if you like. But
just quickly dive into what exactly.
Okay, so
point of pressure.
We know from the paper that we published, and we've talked about it a couple of times now, about shoeing around center of rotation versus shoeing around point of balance. Yeah. So if we shoe 50-50 behind center of rotation, so even more than 50-50 around center of rotation. So let's say the 50-50 would be back towards the back of the green circle. Then if you shoe like that, then your toe is going to really sink in every time that horse loads on the soft. So center of rotation is your maximum 50-50. Okay, you don't want to go beyond that, because you're going to really start affecting the orientation of the foot on soft. However, you also don't want to go to a point where your 50-50 is in front of the point of balance either. Because if your 50-50 goes in front of the point of balance, then your heels are going to keep sinking in every time, and you're going to create problems with your deep digital flexor tendon. So appropriate balance, 50-50 balance of the base, is in between these two. So in this green zone that you can see in the picture. So that means, let's say if you shoe 50-50 around center of rotation, and then the owner takes photos throughout the cycle, at the point where 50-50 has moved from center of rotation to point of balance, that tells you it's time for shoeing, because your base has moved that much to the point of balance. Does that make sense?
Meaning center of pressure.
Your base, the center of your base.
Right, but what I'm talking about is that in your paper, you also talked about center of pressure and how that moves, how the caudally as the horse grows. So meaning wherever that horse is in his stride, that is where all of the pressure in the hoof is coming down at. Correct?
Yeah. So as the base proportions move forward, the center of pressure also moves forward. And as the center of pressure moves forward, you have the increased collapse of the foot, which means increased strain on the tendons. So
that's a really fancy way of saying that it's important to stay on a short schedule, and too much center of rotation is going to make the horse dive forward, and not having those proportions correct, or letting the horses go too long is going to make them fall back on their heels. Correct?
Exactly, and also increased strain in the tendons and as well. So
anything too much is bad. We just want to keep them right where God meant them, right?
Exactly. So that's the point. The point is that if you keep the base proportions within that green zone, then that's where God intended them to be. So that's where everything's happy. That's where you've got the right amount of strain on the different tendons and ligaments. So in that green zone, so that allows farrier and owner to create an objective shoeing cycle length as well.
Hey, before you move on, we got a couple questions here. So Jamie, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher your last name, but Jamie Foodie, sorry. Thanks a million. My mare has very straight pasterns, and I had this exact conversation last fall. The doc said because her PA was 3, it was fine. The rads did not show a straight line. This makes me feel so much better.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. Absolute PA number is completely irrelevant unless you're thinking about the relationship of the pedal bone with the other 3 phalanges. With the whole bone alignment has to be considered when you're thinking about PA. So yeah, absolutely spot on.
Kind of applies everything with horses though. Like you just don't get to pick one.
Yeah,
you just don't get to pick one thing and live and die from it. Yes, Jamie, I'm sorry, that was from earlier. I apologize, but
that's all right.
Also, Brad Maynard has a great question, or not a question, but he's saying the sorest limb, this is when you're talking about high-low horses. He said the sorest limb on majority of horses in the is the hind diagonal from the low foot on high-low horses. This was important for me to understand getting them to ideal. I've also noticed a correlation with the number of injuries and excess growth on the hind diagonal from the low foot. Once I focused on getting broken back pastern access low foot into more ideal alignment, it helped stop soreness and expedited growth on that hind. What do you guys think? Well, I think I absolutely see that a direct correlation with the diagonal limb, and even size differences too. I think that's directly related. Is it an absolute? No, I've seen it not be an absolutely, but the majority of the time, absolutely. And the one thing you are spot on about is compensatory lameness in horses is a real thing.
Definitely. And actually, I think that's a great subject for next time, because I could talk for an hour on high-low easily. But just to quickly answer it, the reason that you're seeing the diagonal hind is because horses compensate for asymmetrical propulsive forces in front. What that means is when you have a high-low, the low foot breaks more than the high foot. So that means that the 2 feet are not creating the same propulsive forces. The horse is creating more propulsion on the high foot, less propulsion on the low foot. And in order for them to stay going in a straight line, they have to stiffen their spine and then use the diagonal hind to straighten themselves back up. So basically, they overuse the diagonal to the low foot in order to stay going in a straight line. But we can get into high-low in detail another time. So that's actually a really great subject.
I'm so proud of you, Yogi. You stayed out of a rabbit hole. Look at you.
Yeah, but yeah, I can talk about that for ages. So we'll do that another time.
We need some more. We need some more questions. There's some good farriers watching this, I know. Let us have it. But go ahead.
Yeah, let's have it. So what you'll also notice, and because what we're talking about today is the external measurements and what they can tell us, right? So what you'll notice on the coronet or line is that we have an angle, okay? This is 21 degrees on this one. And we know there's anecdotally that lots of people use this. They follow the hairline trajectory from the hind foot, and if it goes above the carpus in front, above the knee in front, then it's said to have negative plantar angles. The problem with this measurement is that when horses have poor hind hoof balance behind, they move their hind limbs, so this can be inaccurate. So what I did and what a friend of mine did in 2 different studies was, instead of projecting the line from the coronet band to the front foot, is we measured the actual coronet angle. Okay, the actual angle of the coronet, like here, we measured the actual angle there. And this was a friend of mine, Stuart. The 2022 study found that 90% of horses with a 30-degree coronet angle have negative plantar angles. 88% of horses with a 28-degree coronet angle, have negative plantar angles. And in my study, I found that the average negative plantar angle had a coronet angle of heading towards 30 degrees, right? Whereas when we corrected them, they were closer to 22, 23 degrees. So that tells us that this coronet angle, when we place the template on the coronet and we see that angle getting above 27 degrees, then straight away we need to question, do we have negative plantar angle? So that's a really important angle measurement to have. And you can see here, so on the left here, this was a horse with a negative plantar angle, and it had a 29-degree coronet angle. After I corrected it, we no longer had negative plantar angles, and we had a 21-degree coronet angle. So coronet angle is a really, really useful external measurement for understanding whereabouts or when your plantar angle or palmar angle could be getting towards negative. So what do you think of that, Lee? Is that useful?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We could dive into this so much, and this is me trying to stay out of the rabbit holes. And I hope you can show my video in a minute, but I think negative plantar angles is an epidemic. And I think that I don't know why, because you're talking about studies that have been around a while. So I don't know. I think it's one of the most worthwhile things talking about if you really want to help horses on a large scale, and whether that's empowering the horse owner to visually see those lines. And what I encourage people to do, or even what I'll do, is just take a picture with your phone. You hit the markup app, and they have a ruler. You put the ruler at the same angle as the coronary band, and switch to your other slide, back one. And you just draw that line. And honestly, these angles all look pretty good. Like, I see a lot of rodeo horses. I see a lot of barrel horses. And I would say more than not, can you go back one more?
Yeah.
I would say more than not right there. If they're around the knee in short, there's no need to x-ray them. Everything's going to be pretty good. If it's above the knee, it's probably still okay. But if your line is at the front cinch, you have a problem. And if your line is at the back cinch, you have a major problem. And that sounds pretty common, like everybody makes sense of that. But I see literally the best in the world barrel horses pointing at the cinches. And you think I'm wrong? Just walk by them sometime.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can definitely use this line to the front limb, but what we found with the studies was that it's more accurate to actually measure the coronet angle. So that's where that bit comes into it. So yeah, it's but yeah, definitely you can, if you sight it, if you're looking at it and you can see it straight off, then that's where you go, oh, I better take a photo of that and check that, because that's very, very useful. So this is what I was saying about hoof map. So if you've got something in the image that you know the length of, you can actually start having linear measurements. So we can see we've got 1.1 centimeter, 1 centimeter. So you can actually use hoof map to make linear measurements, but that's boring stuff, right? So now let's get on to this bone angle thing, right? So people wanted to fully understand how. So we've established that coronet angle of above 27 means you probably should get an X-ray, because you're going to be close. You're going to be close to 0 to negative palmar or plantar angle. But once you've had the radiograph, the point is once you've had a radiograph of your horse and you know its bone angle, you don't need radiographs. Okay, this is the important thing. If you've ever had a radiograph of your horse, and as long as it hasn't had laminitis, where everything's no longer in parallel, then you don't need a radiograph. So look here. So I've measured the bone angle here. It's 49 degrees, right? You can see the bone angle there. It says 49. Okay, it's the angle between the front of the pedal bone and the sole of the pedal bone, right? 49 degrees. And the plantar angle is -9, right? 49 minus 9 gives me the angle of my hoof. Look, it's 40, right? So if I now take a photo of this, if I trim this and I take a photo and it's now 50 degrees, then all I got to do is take 49 away from 50, and I know that I've got a +1 PA, right? Because awesome. The bone angle never changes, so I don't need to take an X-ray. Sorry?
Unless it's a laminitic, it applies to everything.
Unless it's a laminitic, and then the mass doesn't work because you no longer have parallelism between the bone and the hoof wall. As long as you've got that parallelism, which is in most horses that haven't had laminitis, well, all horses that haven't had laminitis, then this calculation works, right? I'm hoping you can see it now. So the bone angle is 49. 49 minus 9, because it's negative, equals 40. So that means if I trim it and the hoof angle is now 50, then I take 50 minus 49 gives me +1. Then I know I've created a plantar angle of +1. Okay, so here's an example, right? So this was a client, a consultant client. She sent me the picture, the photo that you see in the middle. She said, Yogi, I'm worried about the plantar angle of my horse because it had a 30, I can't see exactly there, 30 odd degree coronet angle. She said, I'm worried because I heard what you said about the percentages with coronet angles. I'm worried about the plantar angle of this horse. I said, have you ever taken a radiograph of the horse's feet? She said, yes. So she sent me the image above. And you can see that the horse has a 51 degree bone angle, right? And it also has a 51 degree hoof angle. So we know that in that particular radiograph, it had a 0 degree palmar plantar angle, right? So now I take the photograph and I measure the hoof angle, and the hoof angle is 47 degrees, right? So 47 take away 51 is -3. So I know, without having a radiograph of that foot in the photo, I know that horse has got a -3 degree plantar angle. So her concerns were absolutely correct. But the point is, once you have the bone angle, you do not need a radiograph. And this is extremely, extremely useful for anybody for monitoring palmar angle. So this was the question that we wanted to get answered today. I'm hoping that really helped.
Speaking of questions, Jamie also had a great question again. Also, only if someone hasn't overfinished that dorsal wall, right?
Yeah, so you always measure the angle from the top inch. Measure the wall, the angle of the wall from the top inch, because you're correct. If they've stripped the bottom of the dorsal wall, that's no longer parallel either. But that's why you measure the very top, from the very top. You can see on this image here that the very bottom of the dorsal wall has been rounded. So I've ignored that and I've taken the angle from the top of from the top, right? So, yeah.
So this is the meat of the whole topic right here, the bone angle. So we are way behind on questions right now, but why don't you just drive your point home one more time. So you've got
Okay.
the dorsal wall angle, and you only measure the top of it because that is what is consistent with what the actual coffin bone angle is. Correct? The top inch?
Right. So corresponds to the front surface of the pedal bone. Okay. So those
Right.
the dorsal wall and the front of the pedal bone are parallel,
Right.
as long as you haven't had laminitis or you haven't had a farrier rasp the wall too thin. So if you measure the very top of the hoof wall, that corresponds to the front of the pedal bone. So that means that as long as you know your bone angle, then you know what your palmar angle or plantar angle is, because hoof angle take away bone angle equals palmar angle.
Yeah. So what's your take on hoof angles, like where they slap the meat gauge on there, the hoof gauge? Sorry.
What's it telling you? That's my question. So let's go back here. Look, I've got these are feet on my books. Okay, they've all got pretty straight hoof pastern axis, and they've all got completely different hoof angles. So what does hoof angle tell you on its own? Absolutely nothing. It doesn't tell you anything. Hoof angle on its own tells you nothing, because with the digit, it's all about the relationships between everything. It's about the relationship between the palmar angle, the angle of the distal phalanx with the middle phalanx, with the proximal phalanx, the bone alignment. It's the relationship between the pastern and the hoof. So any measurement on its own doesn't mean anything outside of its relationship with anything else.
Absolutely. That's always been a personal pet peeve of mine, and even lost clients or potential clients because I didn't have a hoof gauge, and I'm just not with that.
Yeah. Well, you've got a hoof gauge and hoof map anyway. All you've got to do is take a photo, and
Right?
tells you the angle. So what I want to do now, if it's okay, is there's been other suggestions of how to measure palmar or plantar angle, and I want to address them because some of them are dangerous. Okay, so one of them is, I'm sure many people have heard of Strasser. Have you heard of Strasser? Strasser teachings. So Strasser was from Germany, I believe, and her theory was that the coronet angle should be 30 degrees, and a 30-degree coronet angle would always correspond with a 0-degree palmar angle. Hopefully, from what I've already showed you, everyone can see that that's not true, because all horses have different horses have different bone angles, require different palmar angles, and we know that 90% of horses that have a 30-degree coronet angle have a negative palmar or plantar angle, right? So this is a very, very dangerous teaching, and I want to really warn people about it, because I still hear it on social media and stuff like that, people talking about horses should have a ground parallel pedal bone and then equating that with a 30-degree coronet angle. What's your views on a ground parallel pedal bone, Lee?
I don't know. I'm with you.
Yeah, good. So you agree with me that, have you ever seen a horse with good hoof balance and a good hoof pastern axis with a 0-degree palmar angle?
No.
No.
You don't.
So
get
this
to,
is.
I know I simplify things, and you got the theory here, but you don't get to pick one. If you just pick one, it's just like the hoof gauge, like.
Yeah, exactly. So anyone who states any exact numbers is wrong straight off the bat anyway. But the problem is this theory has created things like this. I don't know. Have you ever seen this?
No, no.
Okay, so this is something that I've seen going around on social media, and what it does is because Strasser said that 30-degree coronet angle equals a 0-degree Palmer angle, people have used that to create this template, which they think is telling them the Palmer or plantar angle, right? So this is another very dangerous tool that I see going around. It completely does not tell you what the Palmer or plantar angle is, because we know that this is incorrect. So please don't be fooled by that either. So there's another one that I saw, and I hope that the people involved with this don't get offended by me bringing this up. But there was a recent talk that used trigonometry of the external hoof to suggest that it could tell you your PA. So they said that the length of the frog and the depth of the sulci, if you took those measurements, the hypotenuse would tell you the PA. Now, there's so much wrong with that. It's not even, I don't know where to start. But the reason was, what they said was that in many radiographs, you have what you can see in the top right. You have a non-straight, so the solar aspect of the distal phalanx isn't straight. And what they were saying was that this is proliferation of the bone. So this is extra bone growth at the back of the foot. So the true Palmer or plantar angle is instead should be taken from the tip of P3 with this line A. That you can see the line A. I just realized my pointer doesn't show, does it? So they said that the real Palmer or plantar angle should be from the tip of the bone to the distal aspect of the I can't remember exactly what it was now, but the Palmer process instead of the bottom of the sole. I should have remembered the actual thing now. I've forgotten it. Anyway, the point is that they tried to say that you could use an external trigonometry to tell you your PA. And it was because you should. So if you look on the right, if you take the line along the bottom of the pedal bone before it changes angle, that line extends to the top of the Palmer process instead of the bottom of the Palmer process, right? So they were saying you could use that. Anyway, the point of this is that that does not tell you your PA, because if we take a look at this and we look at this sensibly, that they were saying that the area in red is bone proliferation, but actually what we tend to get in the pedal bone is bone loss, not bone proliferation. We get bone loss.
Right.
So what's probably happened is the yellow area has lost bone. So
exactly.
So what this calculation suggests is that let me ask a simple question. Have you ever had a sulci, a lateral sulci, that bulged outwards out past the sole?
The lateral sulci, meaning
that didn't go down but came out instead. So bulged outward instead of going down.
Meaning,
have you ever had one?
What are you meaning by the sulci? So
you know the side of the frog.
Yeah.
You have the sulci that you can put your finger down into a nail. Yeah. Have you ever had one coming back up higher than the frog?
No.
No. So what this measurement suggests is that you cannot have a negative Palmer or plantar angle, because they're measuring the depth of the sulci as an indication of the height of the triangle. So their measurements suggest is that negative palmar plantar angles can't actually exist. So this is another dangerous teaching, basically. So please do not use this to try and assess your palmar plantar angle. Unfortunately, this was actually presented by some people quite high up in the industry as a useful tool for measuring palmar plantar angle that could have been seriously misread, and really should not be used, because it basically means that negative palmar plantar angle can't exist.
I feel like just my takeaway from this is that they took away simple processes like putting your rasp across the freshly trimmed apex of the frog and seeing how much depth you have at the toe, or putting a nail in beside the frog and seeing how much depth you have, and then making it something you can live and die by. I think that is dangerous, and trying to replace x-rays, I appreciate it, and that's what we're trying to do too, is know if you have a problem, but I think you can't live and die by that though.
Yeah. So exactly, I think we have to be really careful to know which there's only one way, as far as I can see, there is only one way of knowing without a doubt what your PA or your plantar angle is without a radiograph. There's only one way, and that is to know what your bone angle is and know that you've not had any laminetic changes. That's the only way to know.
Well, even on a laminitic though, you can still see on the top inch of the below the coronary band of the hoof wall is diving down into the foot. So it's still a guideline, maybe not as accurate, but still.
Yeah, I don't think I would trust to use it, because you don't know if there's been any sinking go on as well.
Right. I don't mean use it, but I mean it's relative, right?
Yeah. So let's actually have a look at some of these questions. We've had some questions. So let's have a look.
We are so behind on questions. So Levi in Arizona when we were talking about the high-low for future, he said that'd be a great topic for next time. I think that's fascinating. And Lee Duran Thornton, I'm guessing this is towards you, Yogi. Wow, 90%. Do you come to the U.S.?
Fly me over and I'll be happy to come.
There you go. And Jeb Hunt says, do you think you can set the shoe back off the toe in order to reach the center of rotation without compromising the integrity of the dorsal wall?
Great question. Do you want to answer that?
I think we both should. I think we both should. I mean, I just did a whole presentation on the summit about that. And
yeah, exactly.
I think if there's distortion at the toe, then that needs to come off anyway. But if you've got a well-trimmed hoof capsule and you're setting the shoe back, I've seen more problems from that. And honestly, it's not just at the dorsal wall. You set the shoes back and the heels fall apart. You can get away with it for a little bit in the drier climates. You can get away with it a little bit more. But the problem horses, you will have a problem in the future by setting shoes back. And I think that's the take-home message for me is do whatever you want, rocker them, wedge them, do whatever you got to do, but you still got to fit the toe. And that's why I like the salad bowl. That's why I like rockers. Now you, Yogi.
Yeah, I mean, I know for sure that there has to be a balance with it. So as we talked about in that presentation, we said that creating proportions around center of rotation wasn't about robbing the toe. And it's very often actually about pitching the foot up to shorten the toe that way, and then having enough caudal support to engage the back of the foot rather than blaming the toe. So the point is that you can do it, absolutely, and there are some toes that do need to be set back a little bit and with a little bit of a roll or whatever. But the point is that you do not compromise the integrity of the dorsal wall because of the whole effects that you have on the natural biomechanics, the natural deformation of the hoof. And we won't rehash that because you can go back to the other talks to see that.
the very first talk, we covered that in depth. So if anybody wants to dive into that, you can just look at Yogi's or my social media pages and find it on there. The next one is Lee Duran Thornton again says, do you, oh, I'm sorry, this is so long ago, Lee. You got a great name though, Lee. Do you have a Palmar view of this horse?
I know which one she's talking about, and I'm afraid I don't have a Palmer view of it. No. If you've got any questions of what the Palmer view looks like, I can certainly answer them, but I don't have a picture of it, I'm afraid. And then Cash has said, the horse I became very aware of alignment, PA and HPA, I lost because the veterinarian wanted specific textbook numbers for the range. Yeah, and that's something that Lee's said repeatedly is you can't pick a number. You have to understand that everything is relational to everything else. So it's a great point. Thank you very much for that.
So Carrie my buddy says, thank you, Lee, for that description of using the camera and a ruler to measure the coronary band angle. That's good stuff. Too soon, we just visualize the angle of the coronary band to the carpus. Yeah, I think that's a good take home, is just take a step back and actually see the whole horse. But also with negative plantar angles, though, you'll see them standing camped out. You'll see kissing spine. You'll see stifle, hawk. Lots of problems that all come from that. Can you see, or go ahead, Yogi.
Yeah, so Trudy said, for idiots like me, it would be helpful for HoofMap to highlight any obvious problems. I did subscribe, but didn't really know what I was doing. These days, HoofMap could measure relevant parts of the hoop and come up with the problems. So we would love to be able to do that. The problem is that HoofMap tells you angles, tells you proportions, but because angles and proportions are so individual to the horse, it'd be very, very difficult to have it tell you whether something was a problem or not, because unless it was like a super intelligent AI that we attached to it that understood all of the individuals' details and had a huge data set of understanding of proportions and stuff, that wouldn't be, it might be possible in the future. But what I can say is that loads of my articles, the talks that I do, the posts on Facebook, the posts on HoofMap, the talks that I'm doing with Lee, hopefully all of these will actually start to give people a more of an understanding of how to use HoofMap and what your measurements mean and those kind of things. So for the moment, we can't do that, but eventually maybe we can get AI to help us with that. Who knows?
I would like to say too, we keep talking about HoofApp, and this is not a promo. The only thing that we're doing here is Yogi and I have a same mission of helping people and helping the horse. So please know this is just a good way to do that. So no way.
Yeah, you can by all means use whatever app you want. But what I'm passionate about is objective measurements. However you do that. So I'm not just trying to sell HoofMap, but it's just I created it for a specific reason, so it's easier to talk about it. But you can use whatever you like.
We got more questions here. So Lee again says great info. Jamie says thank you. Lee also says Holly. I'm sorry. We get to rolling and it's hard to go back to the questions. So sorry about that, Lee. Remind us if that's important. Cash also says, do you have any advice on how to better communicate bony column alignment with veterinarians? Oh, you read that one, didn't you?
No, I didn't read that one yet. That's a new one.
Do you have advice on how to better communicate bony column alignment with veterinarians? I've got poor experience when trying to discuss this with vets. Not just a couple, but 17 vets so far.
Yeah, I've actually counted them. Well, so this is a difficult one, but I think the more that you can explain to the vet the ramifications of poor alignment, the more you can then therefore explain why why bone alignment is important. And that's another reason why we're doing these things, is to try and help people with a language, with a communication language, to be able to talk about these things. But the fact of the matter is, if you have poor bony alignment, there are, vets like papers, vets like scientific papers, right? There are countless, and I mean countless, papers that link poor phalangeal alignment with pathology. So my answer would be, throw a load of papers at them. Go and find out titles of papers and say, listen, Waguespack et al., Ruff et al., Uhl et al., Osborne et al., Dyson, Sharp and Tabor. If you can rattle off a load of papers and say every single one of these papers says that poor bony alignment links to this pathology, then it becomes very difficult for them to argue with. So that's why, personally, I think education, reading papers, maybe not reading papers, but that's why I created the Equine Documentalist, was to make those papers more accessible for everyone to throw at people. So get some papers, get some names of papers under your belt and throw them at the vets. They won't argue with you then.
What I would say to that is, so ultimately what Yogi's telling you is be able to back it up. So yeah, the vets, they're in this deal too, because if they can't help the horse, then they're going to look bad. So my perspective has always been is that it's just a team approach. And if they're not listening to you, then they're probably not trusting you. So Yogi's got a good example there of being able to prove what you're talking about. What I would personally tell you, though, is that, like any relationship, communication is always the downfall, right? So it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So say it in person. Don't text them, call them, I guess, worst case scenario. But if you can show up and talk to them in person, it goes so well. It doesn't matter if it's a really tough conversation or just one about trying to help a horse. Sit down with them, talk to them about it, but listen to Yogi and be educated before you do. And speaking of veterinarians, we have our Costa Rica veterinarian, farriery, Ramon. Do you see his comment?
Yeah, yep. I can see it.
You go ahead.
In my experience, lower feet have lower bone angles, even low 40s, and higher feet have wider bone angles, but not more than 50, 51. So if hoof angle equals bone angle plus palmar angle, and a 50-degree hoof angle in front feet is many times close to an ideal hoof pastern axis, not a general rule, means a bone angle of 50 needs a PA of 0, and a bone angle of 42 needs a PA of 8. But this is why I agree with the importance of baseline radiographs, where you'll know your horse's BA. Yeah, absolutely. So the point that Ramon's making there is that if you have two horses that both need a 50-degree hoof angle, and one of them has a very, very narrow bone angle, 42 degrees, he needs a palmar angle of 8 degrees. Now, if you said to somebody, my horse has a palmar angle of 8 degrees, there'd be many people who said, whoa, 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 that's way too steep, right? But the point that Ramon's making is that he needs that PA because he has a very, very narrow bone angle. So it's just proven the point, really, is that, and I'm sure I know Ramon agrees that hoof pastern axis is the defining factor. Okay, so creating a near straight hoof pastern axis, creating a near straight bony alignment is the defining factor in what a horse's PA should be. And the truth is that, yeah. So do you know what a bell curve is of normal deviation? Yeah. So in any population, you have what most people are. So you have that's the highest point of the curve, and then you have outliers on each end. Okay, and then the further you get away from the normal is your standard deviation. Okay, so you have standard deviation. This is basic statistics. So yes, most people are within that middle, that mean. So most horses would be between, I don't know, 4 and 6 degrees. But the reality is that we could have some individuals that need palmar angles of anything up to 10, 12 degrees. And then you could have outliers the other end who could need a PA like Ramon said. I mean, very, very, very few, maybe 1 in a million, that actually need a PA of 0 because they've got a very, very big bone angle. So he's just really highlighting the importance of understanding the individual and normal the rules of distribution within a population. So thank you very much for that point, Ramon. I completely agree with you, and you made a good point there. Does everyone do you understand that?
Yeah, that's why we like Ramon.
Good.
Carrie's got another question. Do you think assessing depth along the commissures of the true frog apex and distal toe to be an accurate indication of coffin bone posture? I think you may have answered that, he said. I think you did answer it.
So I haven't seen enough research on it to appreciate it in practice is my guarded answer. I'm sure within the individual, if you had changes, then that would be a good indication. But I'm not completely sure that you can tell actual PA from the depth of commissures. So,
well, that was the whole take home of that study that you didn't like, right? Didn't support.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Just we already talked about it, Carrie, but
yeah.
Ultimately, no. But it is an interesting guideline, though.
So Levi's got a good question there. What's your experience with managing a horse that has negative palmar angle and cannot take the frog pressure? How would you raise the angle and engage the back of the foot?
So this is speaking about outliers, like he was just talking about the bell curve, and the majority of those horses out there, you could slap a 3D pad on him and tell him to have a good day, right, Levi?
Yeah.
And then we've got those horses that make us scratch our head. And honestly, I've had several of those in my career. I don't know about you, Yogi, but it's almost like you just wish you'd get fired so you didn't have to work on that horse. But we've had a couple that are still on our books, and honestly, it's always changing what their needs are. And I think that's where really truly finding out what pathology is going on with that horse. And if you can't get that, Grant Moon taught me one really cool trick a long time ago. Take a roll of vet wrap, brand new. Yeah, you're going to waste it, whatever. But you're going to unroll about that far, about a foot of it or less. And then you're going to crunch the rest of the roll in half. And then you're going to put that right over top of the frog and wrap it around it, make them stand on it, and just stand back and watch. And when you watch, those horses will tell you immediately. Horses are amazing, right? Like you watch your ears, you watch your eyes, you watch your mouth. And if they stand on that and they just stand straight up and they like it, that horse wants some frog pressure. If he puts his foot down, picks it back up, he doesn't like it. If he puts it down, kind of switches left and right, and I'm talking about only doing this on one foot. They go switch back and forth. He's wondering if he likes it. And then if he stays off of it after he decides that, he doesn't like it. So on a horse like that, as bad as I hate to say it, I absolutely hate 8 bars with a passion. I hate what they do to the feet. I don't like them. But we have had to do that to some horses, and then you'll get more heel failure with that sometimes too, right? So a passive pad, such as an aluminum plate cupped away, can work. You can also have a leather pad work sometimes, also disastrous sometimes. But a lot of those horses, they like a little more frog support to unload the heels, and most negative feet failing in my experience. So I'm not a fan of wedging without including frog pressure. So ultimately, you got to just find a way around it. Straight bars can work, but most of the time, my takeaway from this is that if you can just get over that hurdle, get that horse better, and then find a way to help that angle, help those heels without pushing on the frog, it's a good thing. And Dr. Sammy Pittman is really great at rockers, and he's helped me with that. That's one way that you can unload the heels, but you better have x-rays. You better know what you're doing, because I've made them worse, because the trim has to be a direct reflection of the shoe you're putting on it. But we have one right now with navicular cysts, Levi, and she is sound, doing great. Bets couldn't help her. I said, let me try. And I just ultimately rockered a wedge, open-heeled wedge shoe, my number one hated shoe right above the egg bar, and rockered it up, and it's doing great. So you just got to find what that individual wants. And if you can figure out the pathology associated with it, that'll really help. Yogi?
So my experience of cases like that is, if you've got a negative palm angle or plantar angle where you're going to have a pretty severe one if they can't take the frog pressure. So this horse is most likely to be lame and going through or needing a rehabilitation phase. Would we agree with that? Yeah. So have you ever tried leaving it barefoot for 3 days? Leave it barefoot for 3 days. You come back and the frog and the heels are on the same plane, and all of a sudden you can load the frog. So
yeah, no, I can't agree more. Yeah.
So sometimes less is more in those cases. Now, of course, if that horse has got to be working tomorrow, then you've got to take a different approach. And I agree with Lee what you said about more of a passive frog support. So you can have like a dropped frog support. So you have a nice soft dim in between. But what I would say is that if you're going to be providing any kind of frog support to change the negative palm or plantar angle, then you have to have something that isn't just going to collapse under the horse's weight. This is why a lot of leather pads never really do anything, because have you seen when you come back to leather pads, if they're not really thick and really strong, the leather pad's just bent, right? So the weight of the horse and the weight of going through that frog has just bent the leather pad. The leather pad's done absolutely nothing to stop the prolapse and the collapse. So you can provide a more passive frog support by having a recessed frog, but you still want to pack it and you still want frog contact with the ground. But in most of the cases that you're talking about, where you would have an example like that, very often I'll say, leave the shoes off. I'll see you in 3 days. Go back 3 days later. The frog and the heels are on the same plane, and then you can start having a more simple intervention. That's usually been my experience.
I'm going to buck you on the leather. I've seen leather change so many horses' lives. I mean, I know what you're saying about how it'll cup to the foot and it'll kind of mirror the frog, but we've drilled holes in the back of it and applied dental impression material under it. And I think that's where knowing the differences between the dental impression material, shore numbers, is the extra soft is 15, the medium is 25, or the extra soft is 15, soft is 25, and the medium is 35. So a lot more rigid, soft, and like putty. So there's a lot of different ways to help these horses, but the barefoot, honestly, like we've seen a lot of horses that have helped a lot with that. And one of the horses actually I was talking about that we went heart bar, egg bar, straight bar, pad was disastrous. And then we get this horse doing better with straight bar. And then Jeb actually took her barefoot, and this horse has been barefoot for like 6 months and is doing absolutely amazing. The foot looks better than any time we ever shot it. So I don't know. I'm a big fan of whatever it takes.
Yeah, well, I don't disagree. I just know in my experience with like severe negative palmar or plantar angles, of unless you've got a really thick leather pad that can take the weight of the horse, I've just not personally found it had the same effect on stopping that prolapse. But
On
if
that
you've
take, Yogi and Levi, this is kind of still on your topic. Sorry about the questions. We're gonna get caught up in a second. But severe prolapse, though, you know,
ah, where's he gone? Let's see if we can find him. Here he is.
horses that are bad prolapsing feet, we have welded in a rasp at the back half of the foot, and I mean that is just what they need. And we've it's all about the dental impression material under that is what I would say. I'm repeating myself, but we had another one that was a bad prolapsing one, and we actually welded an extra piece of bar stock to an egg bar and then put a pad underneath of it, and it just a leather pad, but it didn't cause problems, had a little bit of frog pressure, but really helped with that height plus a rocker toe. So lots of different ways to do that.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, let's get caught up on some more. You can tell what we're passionate about. Mark says, I operate off the rule of thumb in many aspects that are not cookie cutter, but I have always agreed with Dr. Salvalde's views on HPA and sole plane. I'm not sure if you're aware of this approach or if they're predominantly not agreed with or actually disproven. Thank you for providing these live presentations. You bet, Mark. Yogi, that's a study. That's in your realm.
Yeah. So I've got to be honest. The Savoldi HPA and sole plane thing is not. It's actually a different subject, because if you look at what he talks about and his images are of the encapsulated pedal bone, so including the they've still got the laminary on it and stuff like that. So that's not. There's a little bit of confusion with those studies as to what the actual PA is of the. So he talks about a sole plane, a flat sole plane, but he's talking about a flat sole plane of a fully covered pedal bone, which isn't a sagittal like as you would see in an X-ray. It's actually a different subject, and it's quite confusing. We can go into depth on it another time, because that's going to definitely put me into the weeds going into that. But it's actually a different way of looking at things. It's not actually PA and alignment. It's talking about the pitch of the distal phalanx and the digital cushion and the lateral cartilages, all of that as a body and sole plane, rather than the actual PA and phalangeal alignment. So it's actually a slightly different subject. So we can cover that another time. I'd need images to really talk about that. But for now, we'll leave it at that.
Got another one from Lee. Morrison rollers can cause bruising of the toes, especially if it's a degree shoe. How are you measuring ideal breakover and caudal support? So if you watch the first presentation that we did, Lee, that'll clear a lot up on the ideal breakover and caudal support. Yeah. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. Ideal breakover and caudal support, again, people tend to try and think about that in 2 dimensions in terms of the length of toe and length of heel. It's actually has to be thought about in 3 dimensions, which includes the pitch of the foot, which changes functional lengths of toe and stuff like that. So without going over all of that again, yeah, definitely go back to the first talk to
I think
have that.
I think I can summarize it real quick for you. If you're deemed to rebuild the back half of the foot, like such as this foot in the picture right here, you want to go after center of rotation and really rebuild that back half of the foot up. If you've got a foot that's straightened out, then you're going to want to be more at point of balance, and which is ultimately center of articulation, a little farther in front of that. And that would be my take-home message. Agreed, Yogi?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. To summarize it, definitely, yeah.
Okay. And then Cash was talking about his problems with the vets earlier, and he said, I document all of my horses because of the issues communicating, and it's still frustrating. Yeah. Well, I still say it's a communication problem or them not trusting you. So I believe in you, Cash. You can do it.
Bone loss, you're saying. May I ask about the bone loss you are saying, the extension that we see here? So I think you're talking going back to...
He's talking about, yep.
This one.
Yes.
So in the talk that they did, they were suggesting, so if you look at the x-ray on the right, you can see that there's two different angles to the sole of the pedal bone. And they were suggesting that it's increased bone at the back half growing downwards, right? But we tend to know from most research and most understanding of what happens to the pedal bone is that you have reabsorption of the pedal bone. So you certainly see it in laminitis. When you have excess pressure on the pedal bone, it reabsorbs. I can't, unless I'm completely wrong and I'm happy to be corrected, I can't see what situation would create proliferation of the bone. I can certainly see what would create bone loss. So if we look onto the next one. So for me, instead of saying that this red square is increased bone growth, I would suggest that it's loss of bone in the orange area, which would make more sense for pedal osteitis. And what happens to the pedal bone under increased pressure is it tends to break down and get reabsorbed rather than proliferate. So that's what I was talking about in that regard, was when you see changes in the uniformity of the pedal bone base, it's usually reabsorption rather than proliferation, rather than extra bone growth, unless, of course, you're talking about the lateral cartilages, in which case that's them turning into bone.
Well, don't you kind of have to think of the composition of the coffin bone here too, though? It's a spongy bone. It's very vascular. It's meant for shock absorption. It's ultimately softer than the rest of the bones. So,
yeah, exactly. It's very easily reabsorbed, and that actually takes us nicely back to what the chap was saying about the Savoldi studies, and he was talking about when you have increased pressure on the pedal bone that it reabsorbs. You don't tend to get proliferation of the pedal bone, you tend to get reabsorption. So that's actually shown quite nicely by some of the Savoldi stuff. So
yeah. So let's keep going with the slides, and I'll read off Lee's last question here. Horse owner, rider, and they had a farrier that used leather, dental impression, beveled the leather away from the sole and had enough caudal support. Really worked well on her 18-hand jumper. Thank you. At one time, this horse had 2 millimeters of sole depth. Casts were used and shod to the cast. Improved sole depth while in cast. That's awesome. I think that's a good takeaway of whatever it takes.
Definitely. Lee, I'm going to put this up because we didn't talk about this. Okay. So this is a really nice example of that coronet angle using that.
So Carrie, you're going to like this one, and I think Cash and Levi, you will too. So look at this horse. Back up one time real quick for me, please. All the way up. Okay, so look at this horse, and this is a really nice futurity head horse, but its bloodlines would be very similar to barrel horses, riding horses stuff. And you can tell by the bulbs of the right front, like this horse just kind of wants to be negative all the way around, and especially on the hind feet. But if you look at the angle of this, go next. So this is the line that I'm talking about. You can draw with your phone. It's just a picture with the line, and it just brings a good visual. But I want you to remember this visual. Okay, go ahead. So this is before we trimmed it, and you could tell that that is a very negative plantar angle. That was after we trimmed it, and it's still flat. And I think that would be fine. Back up. Personal opinion on the hind feet, I think the angle doesn't need to be as positive as the front feet. I would be somewhat okay with this if this was the end of the cycle, but not right now. This is the best this foot is going to look because I just trimmed it, right? So it's going to go right back the way it was. So this is after we shot it. And then you can see the line improved. It's come down some, but not near enough, right? And then I got to look at this x-ray here. And yeah, I have improved it, absolutely, but it's still flat. So I went back in, adjusted my trim, and look at that. Didn't change the shoe. Actually, I did kind of grind the toe down of the shoe a little bit, but took a lot more foot off. And I think Jeb, my man Jeb, actually did that, and he's really good at finding the bottom of them. And you can just see the progression here. And to me, this is take home is a good trim. And if I didn't have access to x-rays here, I would never have been able to do that because my first guess is the bottom left, and that was not good enough. So this horse really did well, and that's the hard part about shoeing. Like ultimately, I just got him in a prosthetic right now. The goal is to grow a better hoof capsule that doesn't need that pad. But for right now, like someone asked earlier, that's where we are today, and that's the goal. So that was a lot. But I had to shoe him twice as the take home, and I would like to think that I have a good eye, and I am proved wrong by x-rays all the time. So that's why I'm a big fan of, if you got an important horse or important horses on your books, get annual x-rays at least.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, x-rays are so important, but hopefully we've also shown that once you know a bone angle, that the external correctly taken photographs can be just as useful. So if we go back to these, if we go back to here, oh no, this one. Yeah. So if we go back to here and we know, so this is where we got the coronet angle, because one thing I will say is that I'm all about accuracy. Me being a data-driven guy, I'm all about accuracy. And I completely agree with what Lee's doing here with these coronet angles. But what I will just quickly show everybody, just to make sure everybody understands that this is perfectly fine for making an assessment. But if you want to be accurate, if you look at the angle of this photo, and then you look at the angle of the metatarsal, right? And then if you look at, we go back to here. Where is it? Look at the angle of the metatarsal here. So the angles of the metatarsal are different. So the horse is standing more under here than after Lee shot it, which shows that he done a good job because it's moved the base of the horse back. But as that horse moves that hind leg forward and backward, where this line ends up is going to change, right? So what you have to be careful of is that, let's say this hind was much further back because of some kind of posture, then that red line might not appear to go as high as it would do in this image. So that's why my preference for people, just to be more accurate, I'm not taking away from that at all, because at a first glance and taking that can point you towards taking more accurate measurements. But that's where I would suggest to people that measure the actual coronet angle and start to remember that above 27 degrees, you're most likely to be 0 to negative, because that's So if you see that line that Lee's talking about, from looking at the whole horse, like which is this one here, if you see these lines going higher above the knee, then that's an indication to go and look closer and take an actual angle measurement of the coronet to get a more accurate understanding of that relationship. So yeah, just wanted to point at that, just to, I'm a stickler for getting things.
No, I'm glad you did, because I would hate for somebody to think that you can live and die by that. The only thing why I, just like everything, you can't go off one thing, but just like the hoof gauge. But my thing is I just want to empower people to know if they have a problem or not, or if they have a reason to look further into it, was all I meant by that.
Yeah. No. I mean, it's definitely something for people to look for. But sometimes if you see something, it's an indication to look more rather than use that as the defining decision. So yeah, but definitely. So it's great.
Absolutely. Costa Rica's back.
Yeah.
Ramon
I'm studying those at the moment, actually, behind the scenes. Yeah, absolutely. I'll just read what he said. I agree with Yogi about bone reabsorption rather than proliferation. And if you want to understand the why a bone would remodel the way it did in the radiograph that I presented, you need to study Euler's work on hoof loading being heavily influenced by conformation, fetlock position, and flexor demand. Definitely, if anyone doesn't follow the hoof architect, she's also has some fantastic stuff, and I've done webinars with her in the past, and I'm hoping to do webinars with her again in the future. So yes. Yeah, thanks for that, Ramon.
Yes, thank you, Ramon. That's awesome. And Jamie, she says the answer is always it depends, like I said last week.
The easiest answer to give, isn't it? So I think we should probably end with the main question for today was about this bone angle thing.
Yeah.
And actually, it is incredible, because I totally understand that most people would, especially if you live in the arse end of nowhere, that radiographs are not always practical, right? And the point is that once you know your bone angle, you can then use external hoof mapping to understand the internal orientation of everything, and that is really, really useful. And we know that from studies such as White et al., which I talked about right at the beginning. If you take those photos accurately and you use scientifically established templates, then you can make a really good assessment of what's going on inside just from that little bit of information, knowing the bone angle and knowing that these templates correlate with internal anatomy. So yeah, so I think that's it's so useful if people can get an understanding of that, because I think there seems to be people think the only way of assessing hoof balance is with a radiograph, and it's just simply not the truth. You can really get a lot of information from externally.
All right, we got 2 more questions, then we're going to wrap this up. So Jamie says, is that near BFE? Yeah, it's just south of there, Jamie.
Where's BFE? What does BFE stand for? I'm missing something.
You can Google it. Levi says, when helping negative plantar angles on a horse that stops for a living, do pads hinder the slide, and how do you manage that? Okay, I'll jump in on this one. So that is a bear right there, Levi. Horses that stop for a living, it depends on how important the stop is. If it's a heel horse, calf horse, no offense to anybody, it's not that important. If you're doing a reiner, now things get sketchy. So we have had we actually had a rein cow horse the week before the maturity blow out an abscess in a lateral heel of a hind foot. It was absolutely terrible timing. So what we did is we put an aluminum plate on there and floated that, and the horse went sound, and they showed the horse and they cleaned it off and sprayed Pam on it. So that was one way, cooking spray. I mean, so that's one way that you can get away from that. I think a thin metal plate would actually be better than aluminum because it'll have less grab. But in reality, if it's a rope horse or something like that, I would rather have a full pad, like a wedged leather pad I really like, and then you can put dental impression material under it if you want. But like a 3D pad, you got to remember it was built for race horses, meaning the toes sink in, the heels don't. So it's a mechanical wedge as well. You know what I mean? So the toe sinks in, the heels don't, like much like a snowshoe. So the last thing you want is that foot diving in the ground. So if you need to combat negative plantar angles on a stopping horse, full pad, maybe. I don't like plastic pads, but that might be a good instance. Just no frog support because you want it to flow straight out the back of the shoe. But Yogi, any advice on that?
Well, I don't shoe stoppers, so it's a different world for me. But I think the question I would ask is, is there a season? Do you have a season for stopping horses, or is it all year?
Well, if it's Levi, tell us what kind of horse this is. But if it's like the horses we work on, it's all year round. And most of the time, if they're training it, if it's a futurity horse, they're busy training it. And I mean, the cutters, rein cow horse, he'll ride them a couple times a day, not to be mean, but to get 2 days of training in. Like, so the whole year is important. So sadly, no off season most of the time.
Yeah. So that's unfortunate because obviously you can do a lot of rebuilding work in the off season and then let them do their thing in the performance season. But that's the only thing that I would have added is if they have an off season, is really focus on building up the back of the foot and that during the off season, and then put them in the shoe they need to work in for the season. But I wouldn't want to try and answer that question, considering I don't shoe stopping horses. So I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on
that. Hey, we got a couple more questions. Jeb Hunt says, what are your thoughts on doing a clinic together in Hawaii or Costa Rica? I would attend. What a great idea.
Let's do it. I'll tell you what, Jeb, why don't you organize it and we'll turn up?
I think all we got to do is tell Ramon when we're coming, right, Ramon? But yeah, now he'd be good too. All right. Any closing thoughts?
No, don't think so. I think I kind of done my closing thoughts with the general kind of.
Give me bone angle in an elevator pitch. Go.
Bone angle. So if you know your horse's bone angle, you never need another X-ray for the rest of your life. No, that's not true. No, it's a very, very simple thing to know, to be able to really objectively measure and know your horse's internal hoof balance. So it's something that is so important for anybody to know. That's why if you get a new horse and it's never had an X-ray, just have an X-ray done, just so you can know its bone angle. Because if you know its bone angle, you know its PA. And that's the one question that we're always asked and we're always looking at is PA, because we all know it's so important. But if people know the horse's bone angle, then it's something that you can know. And that is so priceless, I think.
Sounds good. Well, I think we nailed the original question plus some. And Ramon, Jeb answered your question with let's go flexing. So
let's go.
All right. We'll see everybody there. Cool. We're getting them trained. This is awesome. Sebastian, thank you guys. I thank you both. As always, great information. And God bless all, God bless America.
That's right. That's the man. So what we haven't done before we go, have we established what we want people want us to talk about next week?
I think they need to put it in the comments and we should pick.
We had the high-low, so that's an option. So if you guys want high-low, say yes. If you want something else, put in your comments. See what you guys come up with.
Cash says, thank you for taking the time to do this. I'll be subscribing. Yes, if you want more of Yogi or more of me or both, I suggest subscribing to both of our Facebook pages and you'll get some more in-depth personal stuff. And the cool thing about subscribers is that with Facebook being so chaotic, subscribers, you get actual information directly from us, and instead of just being amongst part of the crowd. Right, Yogi?
Yeah, definitely. And what I've decided to do is, because we're doing these, I'm also going to do twice a month. I'm going to do a more in-depth Q&A with my subscribers in person, so they can ask me some questions about the questions or any other kind of question. So that's what I'm going to be doing off the back of these for my subscribers as well. So
cool.
You get, yeah, it looks like lots of people want the high-low. So are you happy with that, Lee? Should we do that?
Yeah, should we block off the whole day or just one day or 2 days?
No, we'll do it in a couple of hours, I think. Save again. Cool. Okay. Well, that's decided then. Next week we'll go for high-low.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I appreciate everybody getting on here and commenting. That makes it a lot of fun, and good job, Yogi.
Thank you. Good luck, job, Lee, and God bless America.
And God bless everybody.
See you later, buddy. Catch you, bye.